definition of a near-death experience is that usually it's under extreme circumstances of some kind. It might be a close brush with death, it might be an extreme emotional state or an extreme physical state where the person has any combination of 5 aspects. And the first aspect is the experience of their consciousness leaving their body. Different people say it different ways. Some go through the top of their heads, some lift out, some go through their feet, some through their chest, but they have a sensation of leaving their body. And then usually from a position above the physical body, perceiving the material world. So this is the second aspect that I call the material aspect. Usually they're perceiving the area around their physical body, but they're not limited to that area. They can travel to places, and usually the travel is based on wondering what a particular person is doing, and then zoom, they're at that location. Then typically the next aspect is a transition between the material and the transmaterial world, that is a material beyond, a world beyond the material world. And that transition usually involves rapid movement through space or some enclosure. Some people describe a tunnel, but that's not the only way. It's usually rapid movement of some kind through this some space, and then finding themselves in the fourth aspect in a transmaterial environment. It might be a beautiful naturalistic environment with grass and flowers and water, except that every blade of grass has consciousness. The flowers have colors that are not seen on Earth, so it's not an earthly environment. And people are in different other environments, cities of light and knowledge and things like that, and interacting with beings that are not of the material world. So it might be deceased loved ones, it might be spiritual entities, it might be recognizable religious entities, and there's always interaction, and the interaction is telepathic, mind to mind. And at some point during this aspect is typically when a person has a life review and reviews and re-experiences typically every moment of their life, also experiencing being on the other person with whom they were interacting and knowing what that person experienced as a recipient of the experiencer's actions. And then at some point the transmaterial phase ends. It might be with a choice to return to the body. It might be that the person just finds themselves back in their body. And if they do experience the fifth aspect, it's the experience of re-entering, their consciousness re-entering their body. And not everybody has all of the aspects. Although I describe them in the order they most often occur, they can occur in any order, and they can even overlap. Like one near-death experiencer went into cardiac arrest during surgery, and she found herself outside of her body watching the surgeons work on her body, and there were also 2 beings in the room who were, she later identified as angels, and interacted with them, and some very interesting things happened. So in that situation, the material and the transmaterial world occurred, simultaneously. And I should say too that the other outstanding feature of near-death experiences is that afterwards people are changed in usually very profound ways. And the research is extensive that shows that people become more compassionate, more concerned about others, less concerned about material things, and often develop psychic abilities. Unusual things happen, like electronic devices in their vicinity malfunction, especially if they're emotionally aroused. Their needs for food and sleep change. They become more sensitive to medication. And just a variety of things happen that often reverberates in their social world. People often move into careers that are more service-oriented, and if the person is married at the time of their near-death experience, they're more prone to divorce just because they change so much that they are not the person who said the marriage vows anymore. And the values of the people change, they diverge, and people tend to divorce. But sometimes the partner had actually started out with more near-death-like experience values. So then the near-death experiencer actually becomes more like them. Their values converge. In those cases, the marriages continue happier than ever. So there are these host of changes that are well documented through research.
My name is Godehard Brüntrup. I'm a philosopher by training, specializing in philosophy of mind, the mind-body problem, metaphysics, and also philosophy of religion. I teach in Munich at the Munich School of Philosophy. I got interested in the phenomenon of near-death experiences because I had a near-death experience myself, and it was a very profound one. It changed my entire life, and it needed philosophical and existential interpretation, and that's why I am interested in near-death experiences for a very long time. The question is whether there is a natural explanation within the confines of current science. And there's certainly some resemblance of certain drug-induced experiences with DMT and other drugs, like the feeling of unity with everything, the feeling of an all-encompassing love, even the tunnel experience. So certain elements of the near-death experience can be induced by drugs, but they cannot be reliably induced. In some people this happens, in others it doesn't. And overall, the drug-induced experiences are way more chaotic, have less of a meaning, like the life review. They seem to be semantically less coherent, more dreamlike. So there might be a connection, but it's a loose connection. So there is no full explanation. The main impediment for explanation are certain characteristics of the near-death experiences that cannot be explained within conventional science. For example, that the person who is undergoing a near-death experience sees or hears reliably and verifiably things that the person could not have experienced while having had a cardiac arrest a minute earlier, or because those events that they witnessed are not available to their sense organs. Maybe it's behind their head, maybe it's even in a different room. And these specific experiences, especially during the out-of-body experience, that can be reliably verified from the outside, for those, if they are really the case, we don't have a scientific explanation. So the current paradigm says that in order to be conscious, you need certain activities at the highest level of the brain, the cortex, and there has to be synchronicity, synchronized activity over vast areas of the cortex and other deeper realms of the brain. Now it seems to be the case that some of the experiences, near-death experiences, happened while those areas are less active because they had no oxygen or other nutrients for a while, or they might not even be measurably active, so the EEG is flat. If this is the case, it cannot be explained within the current paradigm. And there's two possible explanations for this in general. The first one is that the mind is really independent, or can be independent of the brain, and somehow leave the brain. This is somewhat dualistic explanation. So that the mind really leaves the brain, or leaves matter for that matter. So leaves matter entirely. If that's the case, then our current standard paradigm is finished, because the standard paradigm, as I said before, argues that our brain activity, higher level brain activity, is absolutely necessary for higher level activity of the mind. So there's the dualist interpretation that would be a break up or a break from the traditional worldview. And the other one is more, I would call it the panpsychist view, saying that yes, matter and mind are closely connected, but not just on a higher level of organization, but deep down below at the quantum level, even at the Planck level. So mind and brain are deeply connected. And even if those higher levels in the brain during the near-death experience due to lack of oxygen collapse, there is a deeper level in which mind and matter are still connected. And it might even be the case that at this deeper level, during a near-death experience, because the higher levels have collapsed, mind can spread out, so to speak, become part of the universe as a whole and less specialized, because it's no longer associated with those higher brain activities. And in that state, when the mind goes back down to the depth of matter, maybe it becomes even more holistic and more expanded. So those are the two models. The one is more dualistic, mind leaves matter, and the other one is more panpsychic, more a panpsychism, saying mind is deeply embedded in matter, and during the near-death experience, it goes deeply into the lowest level of matter, and by that way becomes more holistic, more all-encompassing.
My name is Alexander Batthyány. I'm a professor of theoretical psychology in Budapest, and I've been researching. I do come from the field of philosophy of mind, of psychology, and for the past 15 or maybe even more, 18 years, we've been also studying and looking at death-related phenomena, such as the near-death experience and certain lucid episodes. Well, I think what we will find in all likelihood is that many different fields will be occupied. In other words, if we look at the brain, we will also need physics. If we look at physics, we'll also need information. And from there on, it's going to move towards more metaphysical. Because currently we handle matter as if it was something utterly normal, and then comes metaphysical. And I think what we hopefully will discover, with or without the NDE, by the way, just by looking into nature, is how intertwined they are. I mean, it's not that there's nothing trivial, if you want, and even in normal nature. And so that would be my reply. I think we will move towards information, but then comes one important issue. The NDE is not only about information, it's about someone experiencing it from the first-person perspective. Is there a science of the first-person perspective? No. And as long as it is missing, something really crucial is missing in the landscape of science. So maybe the discipline which should uncover and look into the details is still missing. So some aspects will be covered by information, but then once again, somebody has this, it's my information, why is my thought and not yours, yeah? And for this, I wouldn't know which science currently does exist. There are two ways. Either normal neuroscience will clearly come to its limits when it comes to consciousness. I don't think when it comes to cognition, I think it's an easy game. But when it really comes to consciousness, the so-called hard problem, yeah, and I think it's for good reason called the hard problem. So either neuroscience on its own will say, look, maybe we need another branch. That wouldn't be a paradigm shift, but rather an expansion of the horizon by including, I mean, we study humans. Humans study humans. First persons study first persons. And somehow everything is in the textbook but the first person. So it's, in a way, it's nothing outrageous to say, look, why don't we squeeze it into the textbook at some time, yeah? I think astonishingly enough, yes. And to a very strong degree. Why? Because, and I wouldn't, some people come back from their NDE and they're really wise. They come with some really wise aphorisms if you want, yeah. But this is unique. From person to person it's different. There's one common topic which I believe has a strong message for us, yeah, even those who didn't have an NDE, namely the life review. People do remember. And they remember almost everything. And I do know from cases where they checked in the photo album, so they remembered that the teacher had red socks on one day, which is in principle not important, yeah. And yet maybe it is important that somebody had the attention to look at this, yeah. And this attention somehow is preserved. And I think it's very telling that evolution or the spiritual world, whatever it is, so whatever is the driver of it, yeah, doesn't say, you know, let's forget it's not important. No, at the very last moments, it is so important that even the small details are remembered, number one. Number two, there is this phenomenon which we term empathic memory, yeah. In other words, people not only remember what they did or did not do and should have done, but how it affects other people. Yeah. So for the first time, perhaps they have an idea on the ripple effects of my words or words which I should have said and didn't say. Yeah. And this again tells me it matters. It's not like that the NDE tells us there's a beautiful light afterwards, so why bother one more day on this world? Yeah. It says it is important what you experience here. There are no shortcuts. The shortcut would be, if eternity is so beautiful, why hang around for much longer, yeah? But it seems to be very different. We take a lot with us. And the NDEs, almost all of them tell us this, yeah? Nothing was too unimportant. The idea of unimportance disappears, evaporates in the NDE, because people remember so much.
My name is Janice Holden, and I'm a retired professor of counseling from the University of North Texas. I was on the faculty there for 31 years, and my area of research is near-death experiences. It's true that from a scientific perspective, we can't explain why people have near-death experiences. You know, of all the people who survive a close brush with death, 90% will go through the experience not remembering anything unusual. About 10% will remember this experience of being outside of their body, viewing the material world, going to transmaterial environments, interacting with beings that are not of the earth. And we really don't know from research why most people don't remember anything and some people remember this life-changing experience. So now I have to go into the domain of personal opinion, and my sense is that some people are ready for that experience to influence their life, influence the direction of their life. And for many people, a near-death experience is a course correction that helps them move in a direction of more compassion and service to humanity. Near-death experiences are one of a few phenomena that people experience pretty frequently that challenge a materialist perspective. Because in materialism, the idea is that the brain produces consciousness. But what these experiences indicate is that consciousness can function with actually greater clarity when the brain is not functioning, or at least we have no measurable activity of the brain. So it's I think, impossible to explain that from a materialist perspective. Materialism still dominates most of Western science. So, and I think going back to your question about near-death experiences that have affected me profoundly, I've been most impressed by physicians who had near-death experiences after they had become physicians. And almost to a person, they will say that before the near-death experience, if someone had told them what they were going to be experiencing, they would have just dismissed it. But having experienced it, it completely shifts their worldview. And although they were educated and were deeply entrenched in a materialist perspective, they now have a much broader perspective of consciousness. Well, what near-death experiencers tell us is that the purpose of human life is twofold. First and foremost, very much primary, is to advance in our capacity to love. And the second purpose is to acquire knowledge, to learn. And so loving and learning, and my personal definition of wisdom is knowledge plus love. So in my thinking, the purpose of life is to advance in our wisdom.
My name is Enrico Facco. I'm senior professor at the University of Padua. I'm specialist in anesthesiology and intensive care and in neurology, and spent over 20 years in neurointensive care to study coma, altered state of consciousness, and all disorder of consciousness up to the level of brain death. Now I'm working mainly in pain therapy and on the science of consciousness and non-ordinary mental expression. The problem is that NDEs, as well all subjective phenomena, belong to the world of subjectivity. And this means that they have deep, huge epistemological implications. For science has been devoted to the study of the physical world, but is not devoted to the inner world. And this implies that we have something to do in the field of epistemology to understand what we can know and in which way and what is most proper to be done. We need an enlargement of paradigm rather than a shift where the current scientific paradigm, reductionism, is surely a powerful method, but is blind to the world of subjectivity and cannot explain what pertains to consciousness and its non-ordinary expression. So we need to join the first-person perspective, that is the subjectivity of experience, with the third-person perspective, that is the classic objectivist approach, because we cannot understand anything if we do not enter the world, the inner world of the subject who have the experience. And so I think that there is a need to enlarge the paradigm, not to leave the old one, but to improve it, including what has been denied so far.
My name is Andreas Sommer. I'm a historian of science and medicine, specializing on the history of scientific naturalism and the way our Western modern academic culture has completely abandoned a symmetrically open approach to explanations that go beyond scientific reductionism. I've always been particularly interested in debates concerning empirical evidence for life after death, for an afterlife. And of course, near-death experiences, especially for those having those experiences, have always formed a very, very strong cornerstone of that evidence. I've also been interested in historical cases of spirit mediumship. So I've been looking into studies done by William James, one of the founders of modern experimental psychology, with various trance mediums. And so the issue of NDEs is just more or less one of several empirical roads to the question of an afterlife. I would say you can see a greater willingness in the 19th century to explore those questions in a more radically empirical way, whereas before that it has been more of a domain, or has been policed by the church, to put it a little bit simplistically. But the 19th century does see, of course, a waning of the power and grasp of the church on this domain. So, and this waning of power made it possible for the few members of scientific and medical communities who were actually interested in these things to develop kind of novel methods to explore these previously exclusively theologically guarded questions. I think one of the most impressive but not really well covered areas of research are spontaneous cases where small children claim to have lived a previous life, which are different from the more classical cases where you get those memories in hypnotic regression, in that they really occur spontaneously. And so this field of study has been inaugurated by Canadian-born psychiatrist Ian Stevenson in the late 1960s at the University of Virginia. And he has investigated those cases primarily in cultures where the belief in reincarnation is already there, India, Sri Lanka, Myanmar. And if you look at the methodology, you can see he was really cautious not to to avoid suggestive questions, things like that, you know, and his findings, which seem pretty incredible, actually, have been independently replicated by other scientists. One of them was Jürgen Keil, a German-born Tasmanian psychologist, who was really skeptical about reincarnation, but who still reported cases that seemed to suggest something is going on, you know. And Stevenson himself was also very cautious not to claim these cases are scientific proof for reincarnation. And but some of those cases are so dramatic that it's very hard to look at them through a purely rational lens, where you have cases where researchers accompany a child from a family where the child says, "This is not my family, I was born there and there," gives really specific details about the location, about the names of the previous family, and accompanied by the researcher for the first time, the child is being reunited with their previous family, and very emotional things are happening. The child is running towards their supposed previous siblings and parents, and often the recognition seems to be mutual. So on the personal level, I find these cases very intriguing, to say the least. That was just an explanation of how early modern thinkers approach those things, and of course these distinction between supernatural and natural, they kind of collapsed. And even though people like William James occasionally use the term supernatural, what they mean is actually not that. They definitely don't mean phenomena that suggest any kind of violation of nature. Quite quite on the contrary. William James thought that science itself was slowly opening the boundaries of our perception of what nature actually is. And also most other researchers, they, unlike James, they explicitly rejected the term supernatural. They tried to come up with alternative terms like supernormal. So in the cosmology of people like William James and also his closest collaborator, not only in parapsychological research but in psychology, which was Frederick Myers, a Cambridge scholar. So this cosmology is basically Platonic. You don't have this distinction between natural, supernatural. The mind is already part of the spirit world or spiritual realm, and anything that happens in this world can be investigated through the methods of science, right? So you have this sense of continuity between this world and the next, if you wish. So, for example, an out-of-body experience would, according to people like William James or Frederick Myers or Myers' German counterpart, a philosopher with the name Karl Duprel, would be a perfectly natural phenomenon because you have this continuity between this part of nature and the invisible part. I think one of the most intriguing things about the near-death experience literature is that it's a topic that has been covered and continues to be covered in perfectly mainstream medical journals, where those investigating these experiences are not really concerned about the metaphysical foundations, the metaphysical truth behind those subjective experiences, but what is now really widely acknowledged within perfectly mainstream medicine is the transformative character. So you get people who were not interested in the spiritual, religious questions at all, whose main interest was making money, having a good life, you know. And after this experience, they are changed. And so one of the overwhelming feature of near-death experience is a strong increase in compassion, empathy, a sense of social responsibility. And also a disregard of consumerism, and really a focus on the fostering of loving human relationships, you know, which I think, looking at the world now, is exactly what is needed. And so, of course, in terms of applications of research findings from that, I think that there must be some kind of way to use this really intriguing research to maybe restart a new discussion of what does it mean to be human? What are we? Are we really just meat robots, just machines, you know? Or is there more that doesn't quite fit the classical Christian narrative either, or Christian theology? And and that's, I think, really is much needed.
My name is Jean Hausherr. I'm a medical doctor, a physician. I practice in Lawton, Oklahoma, just outside of Medicine Park. I have been a physician now for 44 years, a long time. I practice in the field of comprehensive ophthalmology, so I'm an eye surgeon. I'm now emeritus professor from the Department of Ophthalmology, and I work in my rural community. I'm medical director of a free eye clinic and a free women's health system that we operate there. So the scientific study of NDE and how I came about wondering about that really was based on my own NDE, which occurred when I was 20 years old in the year of 1977. At the time of this, I was 2 years into medical school training out of 6 years, so I was almost halfway through. And I scoured the literature. I looked everywhere scientifically for anything to explain this. I didn't know what to call it. The term NDE I never came across. And so I started to try to look for answers to what happened to me. Scientifically, for me, you can do prospective studies, you can do retrospective studies. And I think because of the nature of near-death experience, we really, at this point, scientifically, are best served by looking at retrospective analysis. And in that analysis, when you review the thousands and thousands of different scenarios, which cross globally all cultures, all religions, all languages, etc., and you look for commonality in them, there have been shown by various different people, including Dr. Jeffrey Long, 9 different areas of evidence for common threads that are found within NDE. And I won't name them all for you now, but for example, I'm an ophthalmologist, and it's fascinating to me, having cared for the blind all my life, that there are blind, and these people see absolutely nothing, never have, many of them. And yet they have had near-death experience where their vision accurately describes their surroundings at the time of their near-death out-of-body experience. And that's irrefutable. It's remarkable, to say the least, and miraculous. Another very common line of evidence of these 9 things is an out-of-body type of experience. The other issue, and I relate to this very well, is the ineffability of the experience, the inability to feel that you can accurately describe in a good sense what happened to you during your NDE, because there's not human words that describe the colors or the extraordinary love that goes on when you have these experiences. Another line of evidence is there seems to be a tunnel. And to me, I really didn't have a tunnel, but I left the darkness behind and traveled towards light. So that's another common thread. There's more than that, but those are just some of the things that are quite remarkable, and they're repeatable. And I was very delighted when I found that this had been discovered. But to look at prospective is too difficult, I think, to do and to set up accurately, because no one plans their near death at all. I don't think we have to change it, but we have to broaden our scientific viewpoints to include and incorporate meaningful things such as near death. Near death experiences are no doubt different for the scientific community, but yet they offer the concepts of hope and of why are we here? What is our existence to mean? What is the meaning of life? Which science correlates and corroborates with that, in that it really looks for truth at the end of the day. And anyone that's had an NDE also, I think, seeks the same thing, of truth. So those two concepts are different, yet truth is what combines or joins them together.
My name is Enno Edzard-Popkes, and I'm a professor at the University of Kiel in the north of Germany. And my professorship is dedicated to a very special topic, namely history and archaeology of early Christianity and its environment. And environment is not the nature environment, but the kinds of schools of philosophy and religion around the development of early Christianity. And in this tradition we find many analogies to near-death experiences and related phenomena, and I try to connect those ancient discussions with our discussions today. I think there will be a scientific explanation, and to my opinion, near-death experiences and related phenomena have the potential for revolution, a reformation, and a renaissance. A revolution regarding the central scientific question, namely the so-called mind-body problem. A reformation for all those kinds of early Christian traditions which has been suppressed and abandoned within the development of early Christianity, and a renaissance for a worldview of the philosophy of Plato and of so-called Platonic Christianity, because there were many aspects in early Christianity which have huge analogies to near-death experiences. I think there will be a paradigm shift within the mind-body problem in the future, and I hope so that this development will develop very soon. One aspect which was common to many people in the ancient world is that this world is the creation of God. And there are much more dimensions in this creation as just the kind of life forms on Earth. For example, in the hymn of the Colossians, there is a differentiation between the visible and the non-visible world. Now we have the question, are there relations between the visible and the non-visible world? And the main problem could be explained with the famous parable of the cave of Plato, because according to Plato we are living in a cave. And we are living that we could see just in one direction the cave, and namely the back wall of the cave. And on this back wall we see shadows. Shadows which are projected by objects which are at the exit of the wall, and we see the shadows and we think this is the reality, this is full reality. And to Plato, sometimes people are freed from the to go outside the cave, and they recognize suddenly there's much more as in the cave as the shadows. All these objects have colors, they have a certain dimension, and then they send back into the cave to tell other people you don't see the full reality. And this is the problem, because the famous student of Plato, Aristotle, says no, the cave is the reality, and the shadow is the reality. And this problem between Plato and Aristotle is exactly the main problem in discussing near-death experiences and a visible and non-visible world. To my opinion, the picture of this parable of the cave is the best description of the problems of people who have near-death experiences. According to the parable of the cave, the person who is leaving the cave is similar to the person who has near-death experiences. And many near-death experiences have the problem that they can't be described exactly. Many people say after such an experience, we don't have the words and the dimensions to describe it. And that is similar to the problem when a person has left the cave and has to go back and describe what the world outside the cave looks like. That's the same problem. And for me, the best reflection of this problem of people with near-death experiences.
My name is Hubert Knobloch. I'm professor of general sociology at the Technical University of Berlin. My research interests are mainly communication, knowledge, sociology of religion, and some minor areas, something like the sociology of death or sociological thanatologies among those. When I was studying in the 70s and especially in the 80s, there was still the common idea that death is a taboo in society, and one does not talk about death, and death is hidden in society. But it seemed to me then, especially already in the 80s, that things have changed. Moody's book has appeared in Germany in the mid-70s, and also the public opinion has been changing. So I felt that one has to turn to death and make death a topic. I have to admit that I've been a coward, so I first started with near-death experience because this was kind of easy, accessible to me. It was a kind of method because we've been doing qualitative research, so I started studying first by qualitative interviews of near-death experience, but I continued and doing research on dissections after that and on organ donation, with also the goal that death should be also become more of a topic in the social sciences as in the science general. First, we started with the kind of theory of communication approach because given the findings of Moody's and others up to Grayson, we assumed that this kind of commonality of experience and of experiential motives is linked to a narrative, as we've lived to see it now, to form of a narrative, and inferred that it must be something like a genre, which has to be used in order to communicate this kind of experience, to mark them as specific and so on. And so I started some interviews, first using the snowball system in the southern of Germany, which is a very Catholic region. And in this region, the surprise to me was very much so, in Germany and Switzerland, I have to say, that the majority actually of the interviews I led with various people, old, young, female, male, and so on, differed quite significantly from the assumption of a common genre and of shared motives. And this, of course, drove us to continue this research and try to test it in a way. And by accident, we got access to research project money. And so we could conduct a representative research, a quantitative research, somehow to test this whole thing. Well, both is interesting. First of all, the content differed. For example, we found experiences who had very traditional conceptions, traditional motives, which didn't turn up somewhere else. You could imagine like medieval experiences. Of course, we also had some rather new agey ones, but we had also different ones which were corroborated by the later research, as we had access to people from East Germany who haven't been socialized with a religious background, who had quite diverse kind of experience. So the motives have been quite different, but from a sociology of religion point of view, it was also, of course, very interesting that it's kind of experiences of what we call big or great transcendencies, the other world, the real experience, the real, some are very, very close to death, that these kind of experiences wouldn't be interpreted in a classical religious way. To the contrary, the interpretations, most of the interpretations, the vast majority of interpretations, at least of the experiences in Germany, in West Germany, one has to say, led people outside, to go outside, to look for interpretations outside of the church, be they rather new agey, be they humanist, be they whatever. I wouldn't use the word significant because I wouldn't take them as a token for something else. They are certainly meaningful experiences, and whatever they may refer to, that's a different question I would like to address a bit later, is of course, as all our life is made up of experiences, more or less of different kinds of experiences. They are part of the life and add to the meaningful order of our life, which is not a one-dimensional order of meaning, but which has various strata, dreams, fantasies, imaginations, and so on, which are all part of our experiential order. And the near-death experience is probably a certain form, and that's one of the general questions, if it's a specific form, a universal form, or something like that, then it would have a significance. But this is to be tested. So far, it's a significant form, and one of the theses, I'm not sure if one can really prove it, is that it's a kind of a fixed province of meaning. I'm not so sure because the motives change, and it's a syndrome of various motives. OBEs can be had without any near-death experience. So I'm not really sure if this is the case. So sociologically, it's of course a cultural phenomenon, first of all. But if there is some proof of a universality, a generality across certain kinds of people in certain situations, then It could be taken as signifying something, but what it signifies is a question of an explanation. So you need to have a good explanation for that, of course, be it physiological, and one of the other explanations, there's no physiological explanation. Of course, there's a good reason for that. By the way, our thinking, most of our thinking does not have a physiological explanation anyhow. So this is not a real surprise. That is how our thinking works. It's not determined, as far as we know, by brain activities. It's actually the other way around mostly. And the same happens, the same is the case for near-death experience. Our task is only to understand the people, not to understand what they understand to be the reality.